Shadows Beneath the Spotlight. Part 1. The Misjudgment and Bias. What if the person you dismissed as insignificant turned out to be the one who held your fate in their hands? On a crisp Monday morning in Seattle, a single misstep was about to unravel a manager's carefully built world, and no one saw it coming. Lena Harris stepped through the glass doors of Horizon Innovations, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd fought for every inch of her success. Dressed in a sleek gray suit that hugged her frame, she arrived 15 minutes early, her dark eyes scanning the open-plan office she'd spent years dreaming into existence. This wasn't just her first official day, it was the culmination of a decade of grit, sleepless nights, and a vision to build a tech company that stood for innovation and inclusion. Horizon Innovations was her brainchild, and today, she'd step out from behind the scenes to lead it firsthand. Across the room, Nathan Brooks leaned against his office doorway, arms crossed, his sharp gaze tracking Lena's every move. 7 years as office manager had honed his instincts, or so he thought. To him, the sight of a black woman walking in, no matter how polished her attire, triggered an immediate assumption: another entry-level hire. Probably underqualified, stumbling into a world she didn't belong in. He didn't bother checking the employee roster or the email from HR announcing a new arrival. In his mind, he'd seen this before, someone who'd need hand-holding, who'd slow down the well-oiled machine he'd built. Nathan prided himself on precision and efficiency. Ambiguity had no place in his domain. "Late already?" he called out as Lena approached, his voice cutting through the hum of the office. His tone carried a faint sneer, the kind that didn't invite argument. Lena paused, tilting her head slightly, her expression calm but curious. "Actually, sir, it's 8:45. My start time is 9 o'clock. She kept her voice steady, professional, giving him the benefit of the doubt despite the odd accusation. Nathan waved a dismissive hand, barely glancing at his watch. "Being on time doesn't mean you're ready to work here. We expect hustle, not just punctuality." He turned abruptly, motioning for her to follow, his broad shoulders cutting a path through the bustling office. Lena trailed behind, her sharp eyes noting how he avoided eye contact with the staff, coders hunched over laptops, analysts murmuring over charts. He seemed detached, a king in his own kingdom, oblivious to the lives around him. He led her to a cramped desk near the photocopy machine, far from the sleek workstations where engineers collaborated on Horizon's latest software. The spot was tucked away, almost hidden, a silent message that she didn't belong in the heart of things. Nathan dropped a thick stack of papers onto the desk, data entry forms, outdated logs, busywork that hadn't been touched in months. "Start with this," he said, his tone flat, final. Lena's heart sank as she scanned the pile. This wasn't why she was here. She'd spent years consulting for top-tier firms, designing algorithms that powered Horizon's flagship product. She was no stranger to high-stakes projects. Yet here she was, relegated to clerical tasks before she'd even had a chance to speak. Still, she kept her face neutral. "Excuse me, Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice measured. "I was hired as a software consultant. Is there anything more aligned with my qualifications?" Nathan didn't look up from his phone, already halfway turned to leave. "You're new. Prove you can handle the basics before asking for more." His words landed like a slap, sharp and dismissive, laced with an assumption she'd heard too many times before, that she needed to prove herself in ways others didn't. It wasn't just about being new, it was the unspoken undertone. The glance at her skin, the subtle curl of his lip. She'd faced it in boardrooms and classrooms alike. The quiet belief that she didn't belong in spaces like this. Lena swallowed the sting, her mind racing. She could push back, demand respect, but something told her to wait. This was day one, a chance to see the company she'd built through fresh eyes. If Nathan wanted a test, she'd pass it, not for him, but for herself. She sat down, fingers flying over the keyboard as she tackled the mindless forms with a precision that would have impressed anyone paying attention. Nathan wasn't. As the morning dragged on, the office buzzed around her, but Lena felt invisible. She tried to catch a coworker's eye, to ask about the team's current project, but Nathan swooped in each time. His voice clipped. "Focus on your work," He'd snap, as if her curiosity were a crime. Once, she stepped toward the coffee machine, and his cold stare followed her, silently judging every move. It wasn't overt hostility, just the slow drip of condescension. The kind that wore you down if you let it. Lena didn't break. She'd faced worse. Clients who'd questioned her credentials. Professors who'd assumed she'd cheated her way to top grades. This was a setback, not a defeat, but Nathan's mind was already made up. By noon, he'd decided she didn't fit. She was too quiet, too slow to grovel, not the eager subordinate he expected. He scribbled a note to HR. Recommend termination by end of day. Lacks team spirit. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond his office door. Lena sat at her desk, the stack of papers now neatly organized, her resolve hardening. She'd come here to lead, not to be pushed aside. Nathan thought he held the reins, but he was about to learn how wrong he was, and the lesson would come sooner than he could imagine. Part 2. The Climax and Revelation. The clock ticked toward 2 p.m., and the air in Horizon Innovations grew thick with the weight of unspoken judgments. Lena Harris sat at her cramped desk, her fingers still moving methodically over the keyboard, finishing the last of Nathan Brooks's tedious data entry tasks. She'd done it flawlessly, faster than anyone could have expected, but Nathan didn't notice. He never checked. To him, she was a shadow in the corner, a placeholder he'd already written off. His office loomed across the room, a glass-walled fortress where he sat, drumming his fingers, plotting her exit. Lena felt the shift in his demeanor all morning, the way he avoided her gaze. The curt interruptions, the smug certainty that she didn't belong. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen that look before. In conference rooms and corporate lobbies, the quiet dismissal that didn't need words to sting. The morning had tested her patience in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd finished the pile of forms by 11 o'clock, her mind itching to dive into the real work, Horizon's latest software update. A project she'd designed from the ground up. Twice, she'd tried to engage Nathan, her voice steady but hopeful. Mr. Brooks, I have some thoughts on the user interface for the new app. She'd said once, standing near his office door. He'd barely glanced up from his laptop. We've got engineers for that. Stick to what I gave you. Later, she'd tried again, mentioning a bug she'd spotted in the beta code during her consulting days. Not your lane, he'd snapped, waving her off like a child asking too many questions. Nathan's words carried a weight he didn't bother to hide. He called her, new girl, instead of her name. A habit that grated on her nerves. It wasn't just oversight, it was erasure. A subtle shove to keep her small. She'd seen it in other places. The way black women were often boxed into roles beneath their skills. Their voices drowned out by assumptions. Nathan didn't know her resume, didn't care to. He'd decided she was incompetent before she'd even sat down. And every interaction since had been a reinforcement of that lie. By lunchtime, her resolve wasn't just growing, it was stealing. She wasn't here to beg for scraps. She was here to lead. At 1:50, Nathan emerged from his office. His stride purposeful, his jaw set. He stopped at her desk, arms crossed, his shadow falling over her work. Lena, let's talk, he said, his tone clipped, final. She looked up, meeting his eyes with a calm that unsettled him for a fleeting second. She nodded, gathering her things, a sleek leather briefcase she'd brought that morning, and followed him into his office. The glass walls gave the staff a front row seat, though no one dared look up from their screens. Nathan closed the door behind her, settling into his chair with the air of a judge delivering a verdict. I'm sorry, Lena, he began, leaning back, his voice smooth now, rehearsed. This isn't working out. You're not fitting in with Horizon's culture. We need people who can keep up. And frankly, I don't think you'll last here. He paused, expecting her to shrink, to plead, to prove his power over her. She didn't. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, her posture straight, her face unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy, until Nathan shifted uncomfortably. You're being let go, he added, as if she hadn't heard the first time. Lena tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. Are you sure about that, Mr. Brooks? She asked, her voice low but laced with something deeper, a weight that made the room feel smaller. Nathan frowned, thrown off by her composure. What do you mean? Am I sure? You've shown nothing but mediocrity today. I've made my decision. His confidence wavered, just a flicker, but he doubled down, leaning forward now, his hands flat on the desk. Lena said nothing for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a slim iPad. She tapped the screen once, twice, her movements precise, almost ceremonial. Nathan watched, his brow furrowing, a trickle of unease creeping up his spine. She slid the device across the desk, its screen glowing with a single document. He hesitated, then looked down. The text hit him like a punch to the chest. Lena Harris, CEO and founder. Horizon Innovations. His face drained of color, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at the words, his brain scrambling to reconcile the reality with the narrative he'd built all day. Lena wasn't a new hire. She wasn't some underqualified nobody. She was the woman who'd created this company, the mind behind its software. Its vision, its very existence. His eyes darted up to her, wide with panic, but she remained composed, watching him with a stillness that felt like judgment. You, he stammered, his voice cracking. You didn't ask. Lena cut in, her tone even but firm. You didn't check, you just assumed, and in one day, you've shown me exactly how you treat people you think don't matter. That's not the culture I built this company for. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. Horizon stands for innovation, respect, and fairness. You've shown me none of those things. Nathan's mouth opened, then closed, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the desk. I didn't mean, look, I can explain. His words tumbled out, desperate, but Lena was already standing. Her decision made, she smoothed her suit, picked up her iPad, and turned toward the door. I'll handle it from here, she said, her voice carrying a quiet finality. She stepped out, her footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving Nathan frozen in his chair. His world, his rules, his control, had just crumbled, and he hadn't even seen it coming. Lena didn't look back. She had a company to run, and a lesson to teach. The real reckoning was only hours away. Part 3. The Aftermath and the Lesson. The next morning dawned gray over Seattle, the city's skyline shrouded in mist as Horizon Innovations buzzed with a quiet unease. By 8 a.m., an email landed in every employee's inbox. Its subject line stark: Leadership Update. The message was brief, professional, and unmistakable. Nathan Brooks is no longer with Horizon Innovations. Effective immediately, Sarah Nguyen has been appointed as the new office manager. No explanation followed, but whispers rippled through the open plan office. Eyes darted toward Nathan's empty glass-walled domain. Then to Lena Harris, who stood at the front of the room, preparing for a company-wide meeting. She wore the same gray suit from yesterday, but now it seemed to carry a different weight, a symbol of authority reclaimed. Lena stepped to the center of the gathered staff, her presence commanding without effort. The room fell silent, a mix of curiosity and apprehension hanging in the air. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Yesterday was my first day here, she began, her voice clear, steady, not as a new hire, but as the CEO and founder of Horizon Innovations. A murmur swept through the crowd, heads turning, eyes widening. She paused, letting the words settle. I didn't announce it because I wanted to see this company, my company, through your eyes. What I saw was a culture that's drifted from what I built it to be. She didn't name Nathan. Didn't need to. Everyone knew. I was given a stack of papers to file instead of a seat at the table. She continued. I was told I didn't fit, that I couldn't keep up, and in less than a day, I was fired, by someone who didn't even know who I was. A few gasps punctuated the silence, followed by nervous laughter. Lena's lips curved slightly, but her gaze remained firm. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to set things right. Horizon isn't just about tech, it's about people. We don't judge by appearances. We value ability, heart, and respect. Starting today, that's non-negotiable. Across town, Nathan Brooks sat in his apartment, staring at the email on his phone, his coffee growing cold. The words blurred as his mind replayed the previous afternoon, Lena's calm voice. The iPad sliding across his desk, The sickening realization that he'd misjudged everything. He'd lost more than a job, he'd lost the reputation he'd spent 7 years building. Rumors were already trickling back to him through old colleagues. How he'd ignored a black engineer's ideas last year. Claiming the guy wasn't assertive enough for a promotion. How he'd favored staff who mirrored his own background. Brushing off others as not a good fit. He'd never seen it as bias, just instinct. Now, it was a spotlight he couldn't escape. Back at Horizon, Lena's meeting shifted gears. She introduced Sarah Nguyen, a young manager with a warm smile and a track record of fostering diverse teams. Sarah understands what we're about, Lena said, nodding to her new appointee. She's here to listen, not dictate. The staff relaxed visibly, some clapping as Sarah stepped forward with a quick wave. But Lena wasn't done. She outlined her next move. Mandatory training on unconscious bias. Open forums for employees to voice concerns. And a review of every promotion from the past 2 years. If we've overlooked talent, she said, we fix it. No one gets left behind here. The changes didn't stop there. Over the next weeks, Lena threw herself into reshaping Horizon's culture. She met with every team, asking questions Nathan never had. What held them back? What did they need to thrive? She learned about a Latina coder who'd been passed over for lead roles despite stellar work. A black intern whose ideas were credited to others. Each story fueled her resolve. Horizon's software flourished under her hands-on leadership. The latest update launched ahead of schedule, but it was the human side that mattered most to her. She wanted a workplace where diversity wasn't just tolerated, but celebrated, where no one had to prove their worth twice over because of their skin or their name. Word of Lena's stand spread beyond Horizon. Tech blogs picked up the story. CEO fired by own manager turns crisis into triumph. Invitations poured in, panels, keynotes, podcasts, all eager for her take on leadership and bias. At a conference in San Francisco, she stood before a packed room, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Nathan Brooks thought he was in control, she told the crowd, but he was blind to what was right in front of him. That's the danger of assumptions. They don't just hurt people. They limit what we can build together. True leadership isn't power over others. It's respect from within. The applause was thunderous, but Lena's mind was already back in Seattle, on her team, her mission. Months later, Horizon Innovation stood as a beacon in the tech world, not just for its cutting-edge software, but for its culture. Turnover dropped, applications soared, and the staff spoke openly about ideas and challenges without fear. Lena walked the office halls daily, her door always open, her ear always ready. She'd turned a humiliating first day into a turning point, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been dismissed before they could shine. Nathan, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. He took a lower-tier job at a small firm. His confidence shattered, his lessons learned too late. Some said he'd change, that he listened more now. But the damage was done. His name became a cautionary tale at Horizon, a reminder of what happened when arrogance trumped fairness. On a quiet Friday, Lena stood before her team, the late sun casting long shadows through the windows. We're not perfect, she said, her eyes sweeping the room. But we're moving forward, together. That's what Horizon is. That's who we are. The staff nodded, some smiling, others raising coffee mugs in a silent toast. She stepped back, her gaze lingering on the space she'd fought to redefine. Leadership wasn't about titles or corner offices, she thought. It was about building something that lifted everyone up, and she'd make damn sure it stayed that way.